old man bought two stunning women to free them, but ended up marrying them instead in a small, quiet village nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, lived an elderly man named Rahim. Rahim was well known throughout the region, not only because of the wealth he had accumulated over decades, but also because of his kind heart. Though he had lived a long life, his days were never idle. He spent his mornings walking through the village, greeting people by name, listening to their worries, and offering help wherever he could. Farmers trusted him with advice on their crops, shopkeepers appreciated his fair dealings, and children adored him for the small gifts he would bring during festivals. Despite the respect he commanded, Rahim remained humble. He often said to himself that life was not meant for selfishness. It was meant for giving. One afternoon, while sitting under the shade of an old banyan tree near the riverbank, Rahim overheard travelers discussing a troubling situation in a nearby town. The travelers spoke quietly, their voices tinged with concern, about two young women who had been trapped in unfortunate circumstances. They described the women as intelligent, graceful, and extraordinarily kind, yet they were forced to live under the control of people who cared little for their well-being. Rahim's heart ached as he listened. He could not imagine the pain of being unable to make choices for one's own life, and the thought of these two young women suffering in silence stayed with him long after the travelers had left. For several nights, Rahim could not sleep. He thought about how, in his youth, he had been strong and able to help others directly. Now, even with age in his bones, he knew he could still make a difference. He considered his options carefully. Simply hearing about the women and feeling sorrow would not be enough. He needed to act. He began to make arrangements quietly, contacting trustworthy merchants in the neighboring town, gathering information about the women's situation, and calculating the resources he would need. Though he was cautious, Rahim's determination was unwavering. The idea of freeing these women from their predicament became a mission that consumed his thoughts and energized his days. When the details were finally clear, Rahim decided to travel to the town himself. The journey was long and tiring, especially for someone of his age, but his resolve kept him going. As he walked through dusty paths, passing small villages and wide fields, he thought of the freedom he hoped to bring the two women. He imagined their faces lighting up with relief, their voices expressing gratitude, and their steps finally unburdened by fear or uncertainty. Each vision gave him renewed energy to continue the journey. He also reflected on his own life, thinking about how luck and circumstance had allowed him to live freely and safely, and he felt a deep responsibility to share that gift with others. Upon arriving in the neighboring town, Rahim was careful to observe quietly at first. He wanted to understand the situation fully before taking any action. He saw the women, one with dark flowing hair and eyes full of sadness, the other with a gentle smile that seemed to mask her worry. Living under strict supervision, their movements were limited, and their expressions carried a weight far beyond their years. Rahim felt a pang of empathy so strong it brought tears to his eyes. He realized that freedom was more than just the ability to move about. It was the right to make choices, to dream, to live without fear. The next step required courage and tact. Rahim negotiated with the people who controlled the women, ensuring that every action would be fair and above reproach. He offered compensation, enough to satisfy them completely, but he made it clear that his intention was solely to allow the women to live freely. The process was delicate. He had to speak carefully, ensuring no one misunderstood his intentions, and he had to maintain patience while the negotiations stretched on for several hours. Through it all, Rahim's calm demeanor, honesty, and respectful approach won over those he dealt with. By the evening, the agreement was settled. When the news was delivered to the women that they were free to leave, their reactions were mixed. Relief, disbelief, and cautious hope flickered across their faces. For the first time in what felt like years, they were no longer bound by fear or obligation. Rahim approached them slowly, speaking in a gentle, reassuring tone. He introduced himself and explained that he had arranged for their freedom because he believed everyone deserved a chance to live their lives with dignity. The women listened carefully, absorbing the reality of what was happening. Though they were hesitant to trust so quickly, there was something in Rahim's eyes, an unwavering sincerity, that made them believe in his intentions. Over the following days, Rahim helped the women settle into a safe and comfortable place within his own home. It was a modest house by city standards, but offered peace and security. He provided them with clothes, food, and the freedom to move and speak as they wished. He also took care to respect their privacy, understanding that trust could not be forced. It had to grow naturally. The women began to feel a sense of normalcy they had not known in a long time. For the first time in years, they could wake up without fear, speak freely without restraint, and make small decisions for themselves. Each day, their smiles grew more genuine, and the weight of their previous lives seemed to lighten. Rahim's kindness was not limited to material comfort. He spent time with the women, sharing stories from his past, teaching them about managing life wisely, and helping them regain confidence in their abilities. He encouraged them to pursue interests they had put aside, to read, write, and learn. He reminded them that the world was full of opportunities, even for those who had faced hardship. The women slowly began to open up, sharing pieces of their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Rahim listened attentively, never judging, always encouraging. He became a guide and mentor, but also a friend, someone they could rely on without hesitation. As weeks passed, the bond between Rahim and the women deepened. It was not a bond of dependence, but of mutual respect and understanding. The women began to see the depth of his compassion and the wisdom he had gained through a life well lived. They learned to trust him not only because he had freed them, but because he consistently demonstrated care, patience, and integrity. For Rahim, the experience was profoundly fulfilling. He had always believed in helping others, but now he saw firsthand the tangible impact of his actions. To see the women laugh, speak freely, and walk without fear was a reward far greater than any wealth he possessed. Though the story of his journey to free the women had begun quietly, word began to spread in the village. People admired his courage and generosity, and the women slowly became part of the community. Life started to feel lighter and more hopeful for all three. Rahim often reflected on how chance and choice could intertwine to create meaningful change. He knew that life had many twists and turns, but by choosing kindness, he had brought not only freedom to the women, but also a renewed purpose to his own life. By the end of those first few months, the women were no longer defined by their past struggles. They had a safe home, freedom to make choices, and a mentor who cared deeply for their well-being. Rahim watched them with quiet pride, knowing that while he had begun this journey to help them, he had also been transformed in the process. Life, he realized, was full of unexpected lessons and rewards, and sometimes the act of giving could bring the deepest satisfaction of all. The days following their release were filled with quiet hope, yet also with uncertainty. Though the two women, Amina and Layla, had finally gained their freedom, it was a freedom that came with new responsibilities and challenges. For the first time in years, they had to make decisions for themselves, and every choice, no matter how small, felt significant. Even simple tasks like choosing what to eat for breakfast or what clothes to wear required thought and consideration. They had lived under strict control for so long that the ability to decide freely was both exhilarating and frightening. Rahim, ever patient and understanding, encouraged them to take small steps. He would often say, "Freedom is not just about leaving one place. It is about learning to live in the world without fear." At first, the women hesitated, unsure if they could truly navigate this new life. Their past experiences had left them cautious and wary of trusting others. Each time they ventured out to the nearby market or spoke to villagers, a part of them expected judgment or mistreatment. But Rahim's steady presence reminded them that it was possible to live with dignity and respect. Despite Rahim's guidance, life outside their previous captivity was not without challenges. The women had to learn practical skills they had never needed before. They learned to cook meals, manage household tasks, and handle money. At times, mistakes happened. Dishes burned, coins were miscounted, or misunderstandings arose. But Rahim treated every mishap as a lesson rather than a failure. He laughed with them when things went wrong and offered gentle guidance when needed. Slowly, Amina and Layla began to understand that freedom also meant responsibility, and that mistakes were not punishable, but were opportunities to grow. While the practical aspects of freedom were important, the emotional challenges were perhaps greater. The women struggled with feelings of guilt and doubt. They wondered if accepting Rahim's help made them indebted in ways they did not fully understand. They worried about how villagers might perceive them, unsure if society would accept their story or judge them unfairly. Each day brought internal battles, as they tried to reconcile their gratitude for Rahim's kindness with their desire to stand independently. These moments of doubt sometimes caused tension between them, as each woman wrestled with her own thoughts and feelings. Rahim noticed these struggles and approached them with wisdom and care. He would take walks with the women along the river, pointing out how the water flowed freely yet followed its path, overcoming obstacles without losing direction. He used stories from his own life to teach them that resilience and courage were necessary companions to freedom. Slowly, the women began to understand that their past did not define them. Rather, it had prepared them to appreciate the life they could now build. With Rahim's encouragement, they learned to embrace their independence while acknowledging that seeking guidance did not diminish their strength. As weeks passed, the women's confidence grew, but society's gaze remained a challenge. Rumors began to circulate in the village about their close association with Rahim, an elderly man who had taken them into his home. Some villagers whispered, questioning the nature of their relationship, while others admired the old man's generosity. The women, still cautious, tried to ignore the gossip, but the whispers weighed heavily on them. They realized that freedom was not only about escaping physical confinement, but also about navigating social expectations and prejudices. It was a delicate balance between living authentically and maintaining respect within the community. Amidst these challenges, the women discovered the strength of their own voices. They began to share their thoughts, hopes, and dreams with Rahim, and he listened attentively, never dismissing their concerns. Amina spoke of her desire to study again, to learn about the world beyond the village, while Layla expressed a wish to help other young women in similar situations. Rahim encouraged both ambitions, providing books, teaching practical skills, and introducing them to villagers who could support their goals. This mentorship allowed the women to see themselves not as victims of circumstance, but as individuals capable of shaping their own futures. The bond between Rahim and the women deepened in ways neither side had anticipated. While he remained a protector and guide, he also became a friend and confidant. They laughed together, shared meals, and exchanged stories from their pasts. Rahim, who had once lived a life of quiet routine, found his days filled with purpose and joy. The women, in turn, discovered that trust and companionship could exist without fear or obligation. Their shared experiences created a foundation of mutual respect and understanding, making the house they now shared feel less like a shelter and more like a home. Yet, as much as progress was made, moments of tension and fear persisted. The women were still wary of being taken advantage of, unsure if their freedom was truly secure. Occasionally, strangers in the village would make probing questions or judgmental comments, reminding them that society did not always celebrate acts of compassion. In these moments, Rahim's guidance was crucial. He would remind them, gently but firmly, that the opinions of others should not dictate their choices, and that living honestly and with integrity was more important than seeking approval. Slowly, the women internalized this lesson, learning to navigate social challenges with confidence and grace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of gold and pink, Rahim sat with the women on the porch of his house. The river flowed quietly nearby, reflecting the soft light, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Amina and Layla shared stories of their childhood, of dreams that had been interrupted, and moments of happiness. Rahim listened, sometimes offering his own reflections, sometimes simply letting them speak. In these quiet moments, a deep understanding emerged, a recognition that life could be painful, but it could also be filled with joy, learning, and unexpected companionship. As the seasons changed, the women became more integrated into village life. They visited neighbors, helped with small tasks, and began forming friendships. Their laughter, once rare and cautious, now echoed through the house and garden. Rahim observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. He knew that the women were learning to live fully, to embrace both freedom and responsibility. Yet, he also knew that the journey was ongoing. Challenges would continue to arise, and the women would face moments of doubt and fear. But he trusted in their resilience and in the lessons they were learning together. In these months of adjustment, the women also discovered the unexpected depth of their feelings toward Rahim. At first, their gratitude had been simple and straightforward. But over time, they recognized that his presence in their lives had brought a sense of safety, warmth, and connection that went beyond mere kindness. They found comfort in his wisdom, joy in his humor, and a sense of stability they had never known. It was a realization both exciting and confusing, as they navigated emotions that were new and unfamiliar. Rahim, for his part, also noticed a subtle shift in his own feelings. He found himself valuing their presence more deeply than he had anticipated, appreciating not only their company but their intelligence, courage, and spirit. Despite the growing bond, the women remained cautious. They were aware of societal expectations and the complexities of their situation. Trust, they realized, was a slow process, and they needed time to understand not only Rahim's intentions, but also their own hearts. They spent hours discussing their fears and hopes with one another, supporting each other as they navigated the delicate balance between independence and gratitude. Their conversations were honest and heartfelt, strengthening their relationship and giving them the courage to face challenges together. Through all of this, the village began to accept their story. People saw that Rahim's intentions were genuine, and that the women were finding strength and confidence in their new lives. The initial gossip faded, replaced by curiosity and admiration. Villagers began to offer small acts of kindness and support, welcoming the women into community activities and celebrations. Slowly, the women realized that freedom was not only about escaping past constraints, but also about building a meaningful, respected place in the world. By the end of the first year, Amina and Layla had transformed in ways that were remarkable. They were no longer timid or hesitant. They walked with confidence, spoke with clarity, and faced challenges with courage. Rahim watched their growth with pride, understanding that his decision to intervene had created ripples far beyond what he could have imagined. Yet, even with progress and acceptance, life remained a delicate dance of emotions, choices, and responsibilities. The women continued to explore their feelings toward Rahim, navigating the complexities of gratitude, trust, and emerging affection. Though freedom had been gained, the path forward was filled with both opportunity and uncertainty. Every day presented new lessons, moments of joy, and occasional setbacks. Rahim, Amina, and Layla learned that life's journey was never simple, but that companionship, understanding, and empathy could make even the most difficult challenges bearable. Together, they discovered that resilience was not just about surviving hardship, but about embracing change, growing stronger, and finding happiness in unexpected places. As months passed, life in Rahim's home settled into a rhythm of quiet comfort and gentle routine. The two young women, Amina and Layla, had adapted to their newfound freedom, yet each day continued to bring subtle challenges and lessons. They were growing stronger, more confident, and more independent, but at the same time, the presence of the elderly man who had rescued them began to stir emotions they had not anticipated. Initially, their feelings toward him had been simple: gratitude, respect, and relief. But over time, these feelings began to evolve. A quiet warmth, a sense of safety, and even a deep admiration started to fill the spaces between them. And each woman found herself thinking about Rahim in ways she had never expected. Rahim, too, noticed a change. At first, he had seen his role purely as a protector and mentor, someone who had the responsibility to care for and guide these young women after their long ordeal. But as he spent more time with them, listening to their hopes, dreams, and fears, he began to see them as more than just people in need of help. He admired their intelligence, their courage, and their kindness. He laughed at their jokes, marveled at their curiosity, and felt a renewed sense of energy from their presence. It was as if their lives had filled a quiet emptiness in his own heart, an emptiness he had not fully recognized until now. One evening, the three sat together on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the garden. Amina was reading a book aloud, her voice soft but clear, while Layla quietly stitched a piece of cloth. Rahim listened with a gentle smile, his eyes following the rhythm of their activity. For a moment, the air was filled only with the sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of the river, and the occasional bird call. In that quiet, unspoken moments passed, a feeling of closeness forming that was both comforting and unsettling. The women began to notice small things about Rahim: the way he carefully listened to their words, how he remembered even minor details of their lives, and how he never judged their mistakes. These observations made them feel valued, seen, and appreciated in a way they had never experienced before. It was not just his attention or guidance that affected them. It was the sense of stability and trust that Rahim brought into their lives. After years of fear and uncertainty, they had come to rely on his steady presence. They knew that he would always act with honesty, fairness, and care, no matter the situation. Over time, this trust deepened into a quiet affection, a feeling that grew slowly but steadily with each passing day. Yet neither woman fully understood the complexity of these emotions, and the uncertainty of them created both excitement and hesitation. They felt drawn to him in a way that was new and confusing, blending gratitude with admiration and eventually with a sense of attachment that neither could fully explain. Rahim, however, remained sensitive to their pace and emotions. He never forced attention or affection upon them, recognizing the fragility of their past experiences. He continued to provide guidance, comfort, and mentorship, all while allowing the women to explore their independence. This careful balance created an atmosphere in which trust could grow naturally, without pressure or expectation. And yet, even with this caution, the connections between them could not remain purely formal. There were moments of laughter, quiet conversation, and shared experience that brought their hearts closer together in ways that were both meaningful and inevitable. The turning point came during a particularly stormy night. Rain poured heavily against the windows, and the sound of wind howling through the trees created an atmosphere of tension. Amina had been feeling unwell, and Rahim had spent the evening tending to her, offering warm tea and gentle care. Layla, worried for her friend, stayed close, holding her hand and speaking softly to comfort her. For hours, the three remained together in the small, candlelit room, the storm raging outside while a sense of closeness and reliance grew inside. The women realized in that moment how deeply they valued Rahim's presence, not just for safety, but for the comfort, understanding, and kindness he brought into their lives. They began to see him as someone irreplaceable, someone who had become central to their emotional world. It was also during this period that Rahim reflected on the changes he felt within himself. He had always valued compassion and generosity, but the presence of Amina and Layla awakened something more. He realized that the feelings he had once reserved for family or old friends were now directed toward these women, whose courage, warmth, and intelligence had captured his heart. For the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of something deeper, a sense of connection and care that went beyond responsibility. Yet he also recognized the need to move carefully, to respect their independence, and to ensure that any bond formed was based on mutual understanding and choice. As days turned into weeks, the relationship between the three grew more complex and layered. The women became more confident in expressing their thoughts, dreams, and opinions, and Rahim listened with unwavering attention. They discussed everything, from practical matters like managing the household, to deeper topics like hopes for the future and reflections on the past. In these conversations, an emotional intimacy developed that was both tender and profound. The women began to feel comfortable sharing parts of themselves they had never revealed to anyone else, and Rahim offered guidance, understanding, and respect in return. This mutual exchange created a sense of partnership and closeness that was unusual but deeply comforting. Outside the walls of the home, the village began to take notice. People saw that Rahim's household was no longer just a place of shelter. It was a home filled with laughter, learning, and kindness. Villagers admired the way the women had grown into confident, independent individuals, and they began to treat them with respect rather than suspicion. This growing acceptance gave the women courage to explore more of life, to venture beyond the home, and to engage with the community. They started helping with small village projects, teaching younger children, and participating in local festivals. Their growing confidence and visibility strengthened the bond between them and Rahim, as they realized that their lives were intertwined in ways that benefited not only themselves, but the wider community. Even as the women grew in independence, their feelings for Rahim became more noticeable to themselves. There were subtle moments, how they lingered in conversation with him, how they sought his opinion before making decisions, and how a sense of comfort and attachment always drew them toward him. These feelings were not immediate or overwhelming, but quiet, patient, and persistent. The women found themselves thinking about him during the day, missing his presence when he was away, and appreciating small gestures that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. It was an emotional awakening, a recognition that gratitude could transform into affection over time. Rahim, for his part, observed these subtle changes with care and thoughtfulness. He was aware of the growing attachment, but he never sought to accelerate it or influence it improperly. He continued to act with kindness, patience, and consistency, understanding that true bonds were built slowly and through trust, not force. The realization that the women had come to care for him as deeply as he cared for them filled him with both joy and a sense of responsibility. He knew that life had brought them together under extraordinary circumstances, and he felt a quiet determination to ensure that their relationship, whatever form it might take in the future, was grounded in respect, understanding, and genuine affection. A particularly memorable day came when the women were given the opportunity to pursue personal projects they had long dreamed about. Amina began studying books about medicine and healthcare, inspired by a desire to help others in need, while Layla started teaching young children in the village, sharing her knowledge and skills. Rahim supported both endeavors wholeheartedly, providing encouragement, resources, and practical advice. Watching them thrive brought him a sense of pride and fulfillment he had not known in years. Yet it also deepened the emotional bond as he realized that their lives, once filled with hardship and fear, were now intertwined with his in ways that would continue to shape the future. By the end of this turning period, the three of them had grown closer than ever, yet the relationship remained delicate. There was mutual respect, admiration, and affection, but also an awareness of the complexities involved. The women understood that their lives were no longer just about survival. They were about growth, choice, and emotional connection. Rahim realized that his role as a protector had transformed into that of a companion, someone who could share life's joys, challenges, and quiet moments with two extraordinary young women. Together, they were discovering a life neither could have imagined alone, a life filled with learning, trust, and the slow, steady building of a unique and meaningful bond. The turning point in their journey was not marked by a dramatic event or sudden revelation. Instead, it was a series of quiet moments, small gestures, and shared experiences that revealed the depth of their connection. The women realized that Rahim was more than a rescuer. He was a guide, a friend, and someone they could trust with their hearts. Rahim recognized that the women were more than dependents. They were companions, individuals whose courage, intelligence, and warmth had touched him deeply. This mutual awareness created the foundation for the next stage of their journey, one in which emotional bonds would be tested, explored, and ultimately celebrated. Life in Rahim's home had reached a rhythm that was both comforting and lively. The women, Amina and Layla, had grown into confident, independent individuals, yet their emotional bond with Rahim continued to deepen. Over time, what had started as gratitude and respect had gradually transformed into something richer, more complicated, and profoundly human. They had come to rely on him not only for guidance, but also for emotional support, laughter, and reassurance. Similarly, Rahim felt that the companionship of the two young women had brought a vitality into his life that he had not experienced for many years. The quiet of his home had been replaced with warmth, conversation, and shared purpose, making each day feel meaningful and alive. The turning point had already shown them the depth of their connection, but it was during one extraordinary week that their emotions reached a peak. A severe storm had hit the village, flooding the fields and making travel impossible. Villagers were anxious, some trapped in their homes and others worried about the damage to crops and livestock. Rahim, though advanced in age, moved tirelessly through the village to offer help wherever he could. Amina and Layla insisted on joining him, determined to assist the people they had grown to care about. Together, the three worked for hours, rescuing animals trapped in flooded pens, delivering food to families in need, and offering comfort to frightened neighbors. The shared experience of helping others, while exhausting, strengthened their emotional connection. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a sense that they were united not only by circumstance but by shared values. They laughed together when small mishaps occurred, like slipping in the mud or accidentally soaking one another with buckets of water. They comforted each other during tense moments, offering words of encouragement and gentle support. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked to the skin, exhausted but exhilarated by what they had accomplished together. It was as if the challenge had revealed a deeper layer of their bond, one that went beyond gratitude, respect, or simple companionship. That evening, back at home, the three sat by the fire to dry their clothes and warm themselves. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the crackling of the flames and the soft patter of rain on the roof. Amina looked at Rahim, her eyes reflecting both admiration and a hint of hesitation. She realized that she valued his presence far more than she had imagined, that his kindness, wisdom, and gentle humor had become essential to her sense of security and happiness. Layla, sitting quietly beside her, felt the same surge of emotion but struggled to put it into words. Both women understood that their feelings had evolved, becoming something deep, meaningful, and even slightly confusing. Rahim, too, noticed the subtle shifts in their behavior. He saw the way they lingered near him, the way their voices softened when speaking to him, and the way their eyes reflected concern and care for his well-being. His heart, long accustomed to a life of routine and measured responsibility, now found itself responding in kind. He felt warmth and affection that was difficult to define, yet impossible to ignore. He understood that the emotional bond between them had grown far beyond what he had anticipated when he first decided to rescue them. This realization was both exhilarating and delicate, as he knew the importance of moving carefully and respecting the feelings of the women. Over the next few days, the emotional intensity grew. Small gestures, a hand held for reassurance, a smile that lingered longer than usual, a thoughtful word, became moments of silent communication between them. The women began to confide in Rahim in ways they had never done before, sharing their dreams, fears, and reflections on life. Rahim, in turn, spoke openly about his own experiences, his regrets, and the lessons life had taught him. Each conversation deepened their understanding of one another, creating a sense of intimacy that was powerful yet gentle. It was during this time that the three realized how deeply they had come to care for each other, not out of obligation, fear, or dependency, but out of genuine affection and mutual respect. The emotional peak came one afternoon when the three decided to take a walk to the nearby hills, a place Rahim loved for its view of the village and surrounding countryside. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the fields, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. As they walked along the winding paths, the conversation turned to the future. Amina and Layla spoke about their aspirations, the lives they wanted to build, and the people they hoped to help. Rahim listened, offering guidance but allowing them to speak freely, encouraging their independence while showing unwavering support. At one point, they reached a small clearing overlooking the village. The view was breathtaking, the rolling hills bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Rahim paused, taking in the scene, and then turned to the women. In that quiet, golden moment, emotions that had been building for months finally surfaced. He spoke gently, expressing his deep care for them, his admiration for their courage, and the joy their presence had brought into his life. Amina and Layla listened, their hearts full of emotion, recognizing in his words a reflection of the feelings they had been nurturing silently within themselves. For the first time, the three of them acknowledged the complexity of their connection. There was no rush, no expectation, only an honest recognition of the bond they shared. Tears came easily, and laughter followed quickly after, as they allowed themselves to express the emotions they had long held back. The experience was cathartic, bringing relief, clarity, and a profound sense of unity. They realized that their relationship had evolved into something unique, a blend of affection, respect, gratitude, and companionship that defied simple labels but was unmistakably genuine. Following that pivotal moment, the three began to navigate their feelings with more openness. They spent evenings sharing stories, mornings exploring the village, and afternoons working together on projects to help neighbors and friends. Their bond was no longer unspoken or tentative. It was celebrated in small gestures, thoughtful words, and shared experiences. The emotional peak of their journey had not only strengthened their connection, but also revealed the depth of their reliance on each other for support, understanding, and companionship. Outside their home, villagers began to notice the change in the three. They saw a warmth and closeness that was unmistakable, yet there was nothing forced or unnatural about it. The women had become active members of the community, respected for their intelligence, kindness, and courage. Rahim's role as a guide and mentor was recognized as well, and the village began to view the household as a place of learning, generosity, and inspiration. While some curiosity and whispering persisted, the genuine respect and admiration from the majority created a supportive environment that allowed the three to live openly and comfortably. In the quiet moments that followed, the women reflected on the journey they had taken. They had moved from fear, uncertainty, and dependency to freedom, confidence, and deep emotional connection. They had learned to trust themselves, to navigate challenges, and to embrace the complexity of their feelings toward Rahim. For Rahim, the experience had been equally transformative. He had moved from simply offering aid to becoming an integral part of the women's lives, sharing not only guidance and protection, but also genuine companionship, understanding, and love. The emotional climax was not marked by a single dramatic event, but by a series of intimate, meaningful moments that revealed the depth of their bond. Every shared meal, every conversation by the fire, every walk in the hills contributed to a growing understanding that their lives were intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. It was a slow, natural unfolding of emotion marked by respect, honesty, and genuine care, a peak built on shared experiences, mutual support, and the recognition of each other's value. By the end of this period, the three had reached a stage where they could openly acknowledge the significance of their connection, without fear, hesitation, or doubt. They had discovered a balance between independence and companionship, gratitude and affection, respect and emotional intimacy. But kind of bad. The turning point of the emotional journey had been reached, and with it came clarity. The bond they shared was not temporary or superficial, but a deep and meaningful part of their lives, capable of guiding them through challenges and joys alike. As time passed, life in Rahim's home settled into a rhythm that balanced comfort, purpose, and connection. The storm of emotions that had once surged between Rahim, Amina, and Layla had given way to a calm, steady companionship. Their relationship, once defined by gratitude and cautious trust, had blossomed into something rare and enduring, a family built not by blood, but by shared experience, respect, and love. Though unconventional, it was a family that thrived on mutual care, support, and understanding, and each day brought new opportunities for growth and joy. The women had fully embraced the independence they had gained, and yet their bond with Rahim remained central to their lives. Amina continued her studies, exploring medicine and healthcare with passion and determination, often helping villagers who were sick or injured. She had developed a keen understanding of the human body, as well as the patience and empathy required to care for others. Layla, meanwhile, had become an integral part of the village's education system, teaching children and sharing her knowledge with a gentle authority that earned the respect of students, parents, and fellow teachers alike. Through these pursuits, both women had discovered a profound sense of purpose, knowing that their talents and skills were being used to help others. Rahim, for his part, watched their growth with a quiet pride that was hard to describe. The women he had once rescued were now thriving, contributing to the community, and shaping their own destinies. He realized that the act of rescuing them had not been an endpoint, but the beginning of a new journey. For all three of them, he took satisfaction not just in their accomplishments, but in the way they had become confident, independent, and compassionate individuals. The joy he felt was not one of possession or authority, but of witnessing the unfolding of lives that he had helped guide. Despite the progress and harmony, life remained filled with challenges. The world outside the walls of their home was not always kind, and the women occasionally faced scrutiny or gossip from neighbors who were unaccustomed to seeing such an unconventional household. However, their resilience had grown alongside their confidence, and Rahim's steady presence continued to provide a sense of safety and stability. Together, the three navigated each situation with patience, grace, and clear communication. Rather than allowing judgment to disrupt their lives, they focused on the positive, drawing strength from each other and from the bonds they had nurtured over time. It was during the village's annual festival that the depth of their relationship became most evident. Villagers gathered to celebrate the harvest, and the three were invited to participate in the festivities. Amina and Layla were greeted warmly by friends, neighbors, and even those who had once whispered doubts about them. Rahim walked proudly alongside them, sharing in their laughter, encouraging their interactions, and observing the joy that filled both their hearts and the hearts of those around them. The festival was a vivid reminder that freedom, courage, and kindness could create meaningful change not only for oneself, but for an entire community. Within the home, the sense of family and belonging grew stronger. Meals were shared with conversation, evenings were spent by the fire with books, music, or quiet reflection, and each morning began with mutual support for the day ahead. Rahim had found a renewed sense of purpose in this environment, feeling that his life had been enriched by the presence of the women he had rescued. Amina and Layla, in turn, cherished his wisdom, patience, and unwavering care. They had discovered that true family was not necessarily defined by tradition, but by the bonds of trust, love, and mutual respect. As the years passed, the three of them continued to grow together. They celebrated successes, comforted each other during difficult times, and found joy in the simple routines of daily life. Their home became a place of warmth, learning, and laughter, a sanctuary where everyone was valued, heard, and respected. The women's confidence flourished as they pursued their dreams, while Rahim found satisfaction in the knowledge that his compassion had created lasting positive change. Together, they navigated the complexities of life, supporting one another through triumphs and challenges alike. The emotional connection that had developed over time now manifested in a deep sense of trust and understanding. Amina and Layla had learned to recognize their feelings for Rahim, acknowledging the affection, admiration, and attachment they felt without fear or hesitation. Rahim, in turn, recognized his own emotions, understanding that his love for the women was rooted in respect, care, and a profound sense of shared life experience. Their bond, unconventional though it was, had become a source of stability, joy, and meaning for each of them. Community life also continued to evolve in response to the trio's presence. Villagers began to see the household not as unusual or scandalous, but as a model of compassion, resilience, and mutual respect. The women's accomplishments, combined with Rahim's mentorship, inspired others to act with kindness and to support those in need. The story of their journey, from hardship and captivity to freedom, growth, and emotional fulfillment, became a quiet source of hope and inspiration throughout the region. Children looked up to Amina and Layla as role models, while adults admired Rahim for his integrity and wisdom. One particularly memorable day, Rahim, Amina, and Layla decided to host a small celebration for the village, inviting neighbors, friends, and students. The house was decorated with flowers and simple handmade decorations, and the air was filled with music, laughter, and the aroma of home-cooked food. During the celebration, villagers shared stories of the positive changes they had witnessed in the women's lives and in the village community. Rahim watched with quiet pride, recognizing that his actions had rippled far beyond the walls of his home, affecting lives and inspiring hope. The women, too, felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that their courage and hard work had not only transformed their own lives, but had also touched the lives of others. Over time, the emotional bond between the three continued to grow, solidifying into a stable, loving relationship. While society might have questioned the unconventional nature of their household, the trio found strength in the authenticity of their connection. Their lives were marked not by judgment or gossip, but by mutual respect, understanding, and genuine affection. Rahim, Amina, and Layla discovered that happiness could take many forms, and that the most meaningful relationships were built on trust, care, and shared experience, rather than conformity or expectation. Through their shared journey, each of them also learned profound lessons about life, love, and human connection. Amina and Layla realized that independence and freedom were only truly meaningful when combined with compassion, empathy, and mutual support. They learned that gratitude could evolve into deep affection when nurtured with respect and understanding. Rahim learned that acts of kindness, though often begun as simple gestures, could transform lives and create bonds that brought unexpected joy and fulfillment. Together, they discovered that the most valuable aspects of life were not wealth, status, or recognition, but trust, love, and the courage to act with integrity. As the years went by, the three of them continued to live in harmony, each contributing to the household, the community, and to each other's lives. Their story became a quiet legend in the village, a tale of compassion, courage, and unconventional love that inspired others to act with kindness and integrity. The women flourished in their pursuits, helping the sick, teaching children, and supporting their neighbors, while Rahim found joy and purpose in guiding, mentoring, and loving two remarkable individuals who had become like family. Looking back on their journey, they often reflected on how far they had come. From the days of fear, uncertainty, and hardship to the present, they had experienced growth, discovery, and emotional transformation. They understood that life was full of unexpected twists and turns, but that courage, empathy, and trust could create outcomes far beyond what anyone might imagine. Their shared story was a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of emotional honesty, and the ways in which human connection could bring profound joy and fulfillment. In the quiet of the evenings, as they sat together by the fire or watched the sunset over the hills, the trio felt a deep sense of peace. They had built a life that was rich in love, respect, and purpose. Amina and Layla were no longer simply rescued women. They were confident, independent, and thriving individuals whose lives were intertwined with a man who had guided them with wisdom, patience, and care. Rahim was no longer simply a protector. He was a companion, mentor, and beloved member of a family he had helped form. Together, they had created a life that was extraordinary not because it followed any rule or tradition, but because it was built on trust, understanding, and genuine human connection. Their story remained a quiet lesson for the community, that acts of kindness could ripple through generations, that love could take many forms, and that courage and empathy could transform lives in ways that were profound and lasting. Each day, as the sun rose over the village and the river shimmered in its light, Rahim, Amina, and Layla continued to live their lives fully together, resilient and bound by bonds that were stronger than circumstance, richer than wealth, and more meaningful than words could ever fully capture.